I never thought about the resemblance there between mathematical objects and ideas and fantasy, but it's true. I mean, fantasy writer is almost more like being a research mathematician and having just discovered something new. And that thought is only in your head and you've got to get it out into the world. How do you do that? I mean, slowly is, I think, my main answer, especially when I was writing my first book or two. I thought a lot about very carefully controlling the reader's attention. And so my books are illustrated, and I would use illustrations not just to show the idea, because sometimes I could, and sometimes my drawing skills weren't up to it, or sometimes the idea isn't really all that visual, but I would use the drawings almost as punctuation marks. If I'd just written a fairly dense paragraph that I knew contained the core of the idea, like my generic move is then to write a one sentence paragraph that sort of breaks up the rhythm and ideally is a sort of pithy summary of what I just said or bounces off it in a memorable way, and then put a cartoon there. And even if the cartoon isn't the world's funniest cartoon, it punctuates it. It sort of makes the reader pause. Okay, like if this page is half the blank space of that cartoon now, it just forces you to give that idea a little more space. So I'm not sure exactly what the tools are for a fantasy writer to give that kind of room, but to me, it's slowing down the pace and particularly not burying, I mean, just at the level of paragraphs and sentences, not burying big new ideas in long sentences in the middle of long paragraphs that then move elsewhere, but giving them short, crisp phrases.
I think it's almost like sensory language in fantasy. If you take a moment from your planet, which is completely different from ours, and describe spaghetti, I'm right there with
Yeah.
you. And yeah, it's a little break for the other side of the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that sounds right to me. Yeah.
But can you say more about controlling attention? Because that's a really
Sure.
important
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, yeah. And when I would edit chapters, I remember particularly my first book, that's almost always what I'd be doing would be reading aloud and moving through and trying to imagine the movement of the reader's thoughts, essentially. And yeah, and sort of the way we were talking about earlier, where you're exploring the valleys and the hills, I would try out lots of different versions. Particularly in my writing, I'm writing about math and there's a lot of jokes in it because I want to keep the reader's attention. But some jokes are too dense or distracting or too complicated. Like this happens to me often where I'll be like, oh, I've got a joke for here. And then I write it and it's like a 40-word joke in the middle of a sentence. Like, nah, you can't do that. Like 40 words isn't a ton, but it's
Mhm.
too much. It's like enough that you've now moved off of the mathematical thought I needed you to be having to follow this train of logic and into the joke. And so like, no, that joke can't stay. Got to cut that. A lot of it was finding ways I could make the joke or add a little levity with 3 words here or with an adjective there or just by twisting a common phrase.
When I was reading your book, I was reading it upside down and backwards. So I was taking in the cartoons first and then going and
Hmm.
reading it because I think you gave me the ability to enjoy a cartoon or enjoy your pictures and then go back. I think what you're saying too is that with fantasy, you want to feel smart enough to be able to take in the idea. And I think what you're doing is you're giving us all the ability to take in math in a different way. And I think fantasy does the same thing. We all want to be able to live within that fantasy, but we need to understand it in a way that the right things are highlighted, just like in Ben's book.
Yeah, you need to strategically make the reader feel smart. Or if, as an agent, I feel like I'm going to fail the pop quiz, I'm probably going to reject the book because every writer deserves to be with an agent who would get an A on that pop quiz. But one thing I loved about the drawings was it was these little moments of, oh, I get that. Oh, I'm doing okay. I can continue on. It's safe. Like I
Right.
liked
That makes perfect sense. Let's go.
I liked the Sphinx with the decimals. That was my favorite because it's like, oh, it's supposed to be a hard riddle.